In the skies over the Mediterranean during 1941, Allied pilots began to whisper about a new Italian fighter unlike anything they had faced before. Italy's Air Force, often derided for outdated machines and lackluster designs, suddenly revealed the Macchi C.202 Folgore, Thunderbolt. From the moment it appeared, the aircraft shattered long-held assumptions. Sleek, streamlined, and menacingly fast, the Folgore was a startling leap forward, one that forced even hardened veterans to reassess their opponent. British pilots flying Hurricanes and early-model Spitfires encountered the C-202 during the North African campaign. To their surprise, the Italians, previously written off as second-rate airmen, were now flying a machine that could dive with ferocity, climb with confidence, and maneuver with elegance. Reports described the Folgore as an aircraft that combined German engineering power with Italian style. And in truth, they weren't far off. The C-202 was powered by a license-built version of the Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, the same heart that propelled the feared Messerschmitt Bf 109. Suddenly, Italy's Air Force fielded a machine capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with the best fighters of the war. Allied intelligence reports reflected a mix of respect and alarm. Pilots who engaged the Folgore admitted that it was faster than expected, particularly in level flight and dive performance. Its handling was crisp, almost effortless, giving Italian aviators the ability to hold their own against seasoned RAF squadrons. In a theater where the Allies had grown used to technological superiority, the Folgore was a rude awakening. And yet it wasn't just the machine that left an impression, it was the psychological shock of seeing Italian pilots flying it with skill and determination. No longer could the Regia Aeronautica be dismissed as a secondary threat. The Folgore demanded respect. But before we continue, a quick reminder. If you're fascinated by these forgotten warbirds and the secrets they carried into battle, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more of these cinematic histories to life. The arrival of the Macchi C.202 marked the moment when the Allies realized they could not underestimate Italian engineering. It was only the beginning of a story that would test their nerves in the unforgiving skies of the Desert War. Beneath the elegant lines of the Macchi C.202 lay an engineering marvel that caught the Allies off guard. For years, Italy's fighters had lagged behind, relying on radial engines and outdated frames. But the Folgore represented a revolution. Its power came from the Alfa Romeo RA1000 RC41 Mann per Uhr Monson engine, a license-built version of the German Daimler-Benz DB601A. Producing 1,175 horsepower, it gave the Folgore the thrust and efficiency it needed to stand among the best. Allied pilots quickly realized this was no flimsy biplane or obsolete monoplane. It was a thoroughbred designed for war. The aircraft's aerodynamic finesse only enhanced its performance. The Macchi team sculpted the fuselage into a slender, streamlined shape, reducing drag and allowing the fighter to cut through the air with startling smoothness. Allied test pilots, who later flew captured examples, praised its balance and responsiveness, noting how easily the aircraft could transition from a climb into a dive or roll into a tight turn without the sluggishness that plagued many contemporaries. On paper, the numbers spoke volumes. The C-202 could reach top speeds of nearly 370 miles per hour at altitude, a figure that placed it on par with the early Spitfire MKV. Its rate of climb rivaled that of the Messerschmitt Bf 109F, while its agility in combat maneuvers was described as superb. This combination of speed, climb, and maneuverability gave Italian pilots the confidence to challenge their Allied counterparts head-on, a stark contrast to earlier years when they were often outclassed before the fight began. Yet not everything was flawless. The Folgore's armament drew frequent criticism from Allied observers. Early models carried only two 12.7mm Breda Safat machine guns above the engine cowling, with some versions adding two smaller 7.7mm guns in the wings. Against lightly built fighters, this could be effective, But when facing rugged Allied bombers or heavily armored opponents, the Folgore's bite seemed underwhelming. Pilots often remarked that it took far too long to bring down a determined enemy. Still, the aircraft's sheer performance overshadowed its shortcomings. For the Allies, the Macchi C.202 represented a startling technical leap, an Italian fighter that could no longer be dismissed, but instead demanded respect and tactical adaptation. The Folgore's true reputation was forged not on paper, but in the brutal skies over North Africa and the Mediterranean. When the C-202 first entered service in 1941, Allied pilots expected yet another sluggish Italian machine, an easy kill for Hurricanes and P-40s. What they encountered instead was a fighter that could twist, climb, and dive with startling precision. Reports from the Desert Air Force tell of British pilots shocked when their trusted tactics suddenly failed. The Folgore was not only keeping pace, but in certain maneuvers, outmatching them. In one clash over Tobruk, Spitfire pilots recorded surprise at the Macchi's ability to sustain high-speed turns without stalling. Unlike earlier Italian aircraft, which bled energy quickly, the Folgore held its momentum, forcing Allied squadrons to adapt mid-battle. The P-40 Warhawk, a workhorse in the desert skies, found itself at a disadvantage in turning fights, with American pilots noting the Folgore's uncanny ability to roll and reposition with minimal effort. For the first time, Italian fighters were not an afterthought, they were a genuine threat. Dogfights became tales of frustration for Allied crews. One RAF pilot described his duel with a Folgore as chasing a ghost. The Italian machine could dive away at blistering speeds, then climb back into the fight before a Spitfire could close the gap. In vertical engagements, it performed with the grace of the Messerschmitt Bf 1.9, earning it reluctant comparisons to Germany's premier fighter. Allied intelligence soon circulated urgent memos, underestimating the Folgore could prove fatal. But while the Folgore danced gracefully through the sky, its weak armament limited its finishing power. Pilots often escaped with aircraft riddled but not destroyed, giving Allies moments of relief in battles where they otherwise felt outmaneuvered. This imbalance, agility without overwhelming firepower, kept the Folgore from becoming the terror its flight characteristics suggested it could be. Still, Allied squadrons learned to treat every engagement with caution. In North Africa, Malta, and even the skies of Sicily, the Folgore proved that Italian pilots, given the right machine, could hold their own against the best Britain and America could send. For the Allies, the combat encounters with the Folgore marked a sobering realization. The days of dismissing Italian fighters as second-rate were over. For the Allies, the Macchi C.202 Folgore's greatest weapon was not always its guns or speed, it was the shock it delivered to expectations. By 1941, British and American pilots had grown accustomed to brushing aside Italian fighters as outdated relics. The sudden appearance of the Folgore forced a complete shift in mindset. Reports from RAF intelligence described it as a machine of surprising capability, words that revealed a mix of respect and unease. In North Africa, where the desert sun burned down on endless sorties, Allied pilots admitted the Folgore unsettled them. Unlike the clumsy CR-42 biplanes or the sluggish G-50s they had easily dispatched in 1940, the C-202 seemed alive in the air, sleek, aggressive, and handled with confidence by its pilots. For the first time, Italian squadrons earned admiration even in defeat. Enemy pilots spoke of their determination, matched by an aircraft finally worthy of their skill. The Allies were forced to recognize that Italy's air force could no longer be dismissed as an afterthought. The psychological blow was particularly sharp for American pilots flying the P-40 Warhawk. In close-quarter engagements, they found themselves outturned and outclimbed, and though the P-40 could rely on toughness and firepower, the realization that Italian fighters could dictate the terms of a battle was a humbling experience. One American pilot wrote after his first encounter, "I did not expect to fear an Italian plane, but I did." Even beyond direct combat, The Folgore's presence left an impression. Allied crews preparing for missions over Sicily or Malta often briefed specifically on how to handle encounters with the C-202. Warnings were issued not to engage in turning fights and to rely on teamwork and firepower instead. That level of preparation spoke volumes. The Folgore had entered the psychological space usually reserved for Germany's Bf-109 or Japan's Zero. At the same time, the Folgore's light armament created an odd duality. While Allied pilots respected its maneuverability, many also admitted relief that it lacked the devastating punch of heavier-armed enemies. It was feared, but not dreaded, admired for its elegance, yet spared from becoming a nightmare in the way the Zero or Messerschmitt had. Still, the Folgore's psychological impact was undeniable. It shattered stereotypes and forced the Allies to respect Italian aviation in a way they never had before. When the smoke of war cleared, the Folgore stood as Italy's finest creation of the conflict. Though overshadowed by the sheer numbers and fame of Allied aircraft, its legacy lived on in the memories of those who fought against it. For the Allies, it was remembered as the plane that proved Italy could produce a fighter equal to the best of Europe, a machine that erased old prejudices about Italian aviation. Pilots who once dismissed the Regia Aeronautica as obsolete later admitted that facing the Folgore changed their perspective forever. In historical evaluations, the C-202 is often regarded as the aircraft that arrived too late and in too few numbers to alter the war's course. Italy's industry struggled to match Allied mass production, and by the time the Folgore was deployed in strength, the skies were filling with Spitfire Make Vs, Thunderbolts, and Mustangs, fighters that outpaced it with better firepower and climbing ability. Yet within its narrow window of relevance, the Folgore carved out an enduring reputation. For Italian pilots, it became a symbol of pride. Finally, they had a machine that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Germany's Bf-109s and Britain's Spitfires. Their confidence soared, and their bravery was no longer dismissed as wasted effort in inferior aircraft. Stories of Folgore's dueling Spitfires over Malta or outmaneuvering P-40s in desert skies became part of aviation lore. For the Allies, the Folgore became a respected adversary, not an afterthought. In post-war memoirs, pilots frequently spoke of its elegance and agility, placing it among the finest fighters they encountered. Some compared it to the Zero for its lightness and turning ability, though tempered by European design sensibilities. It was a machine that demanded respect, and it received it. Today, aviation historians remember the Folgore as a fighter of what-ifs. What if Italy had possessed greater industrial capacity? What if its armament had been upgraded earlier? What if it had appeared in 1940 instead of 1941? These questions remain unanswered, yet they underscore the fighter's potential. The Folgore's true legacy lies in how it reshaped perception. For the Allies, it was the Italian fighter that forced them to pause, to reconsider, and to acknowledge that Italy had produced a warplane worthy of admiration. And in the unforgiving skies of World War II, earning the respect of your enemy was a legacy in itself.